Flowers are important to plants because flowers are necessary for the production of seeds, and seeds bring about the reproduction of the plant. Let's take a closer look at the flower and examine its part carefully to find out how this happens. A typical flower has four main parts: the sepals, petals, pistil, and stamens. The sepals are usually green and somewhat leaf-like. Taken together, these sepals form the calyx. Sepals cover and protect the inner parts of the flower when it is a bud. Just above the petals are the part of the flowers we notice most. These are the petals. Their colors and smell attract bees, birds, and other living things, which carry pollen from one flower to another. Taken together, the petals form the corolla. Another function of the petals is to surround and protect the reproductive organs of the flowers that make seeds. Inside the ring of petals are the stamens. Each stamen consists of a stalk called filament and a knob-like receptacle called the anther. The anther is located at the tip of the filament, and it contains the pollen grains, giving the anther a yellow color. The pollen grains are the male reproductive structures. Within the pollen grains are the male sex cells or sperms of the flower. In the center of the flower is the pistil, which has three parts. At the top is the stigma. This could either be sticky or feathery, and it catches the pollen grains. Then, below the stigma is usually the style that connects to the ovary. And finally, we have the ovary at the base. The ovary contains ovules, or the female reproductive structures. Within the ovules are the female sex cells of the flower. These ovules, after fertilization, later become the seeds. Most flowers have all these parts. They are the perfect flowers because they have both the male and female reproductive organs. An example of a perfect flower is the gumamela. There are other flowers, however, that contain only either the male or the female reproductive organ, and these are the imperfect flowers. It is especially in cases when flowers are imperfect or they have only one reproductive organ that a need for agents of pollination is most seen. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from an anther where it is produced to the stigma of a pistil. Do you ever wonder what bees, birds, or butterflies do as they buzz around flowers to get their food? These living things, as well as wind, water, and humans, are the agents of pollination. Pollen grains stick to the bodies of insects and birds, or are wind-blown, which are later brushed against the stigma or pistil of a flower. When this happens, pollination takes place. The transfer of pollen from the anther to the pistil of the same flower, or of another flower but on the same plant, is called self-pollination. However, when the pollen is carried to the stigma on another plant of the same or related species, then cross-pollination takes place. What happens after pollination? When pollen lands on the sticky tip of the pistil, it develops a pollen tube which grows downward to the ovary containing the ovules or eggs. The sperms from the pollen grains unite with the eggs and fertilization takes place. Once fertilization takes place, the flower dries up and loses its petals. The ovary grows larger as one or more seeds develop, and from the fruit which covers and protects the seeds. Just as the ovules become the seeds, so the ovary becomes the fruit. On the other hand, there are some forms of plants that do not bear flowers, but are also capable of reproducing their species. Some plants, like the ferns, have spores which are found underneath their leaves. The mosses are also capable of reproduction by means of spores which are found atop their bodies. These are the first stages of plant reproduction. When the pollen of a flower lands on the pistil, pollination takes place. Reproduction may take place either through self-pollination, which is when pollen and pistil are from the same flower, or from different flowers but on the same plant, or by cross-pollination, which occurs when pollen and pistil are from different flowers and from different plants. Once pollination takes place, fertilization begins. The flower dries up and loses its petals, and the ovules develop into seeds, while the ovary grows to be the fruit. There are other plants, however, that do not grow from flowers or seeds. This kind of reproduction, which occurs without the combination of sex cells or gametes, is called asexual reproduction. Some flowering plants or angiosperms have special organs such as roots, leaves, and stems that grow into whole new plants. Onions and lilies grow from bulbs which are really short, fat stems with roots and are made up of tightly packed leaves that store food. A potato is a tuber, a thick stem with buds or eyes, where new plants grow when planted. Other plants grow from leaves. Examples are the katakataka, African violet, and jade plant. Strawberry and some grasses grow by runners, a stem that grows across the top of the soil and stretches out in all directions. These special roots and stems that plants use to reproduce asexually are generally good to eat because they contain added nutrients from their stored food. There are also other ways developed by horticulturists to enable plants to bear flowers and fruits faster and to produce better and more desired varieties. One way to do so is by stem cutting. This is done by cutting off some branches of a matured plant, placing them in water or soil to root and develop into a new plant. This can be done in roses, gumamela, and San Francisco plants. Another method would be layering, wherein a branch containing one or more buds is covered with soil where the buds are activated to develop into a new plant. This method is used for reproduction of bamboo and other fruit trees. Grafting is another way of propagating plants by taking one part of a plant called a scion and placing this part in such a way as to form a union with another plant called a stalk. This was used in early fruiting varieties of pomelo, rambutan, lanzones, and other fruit trees. Still another method of asexual propagation is by tissue culture. It makes use of any small living part of a plant called tissue. These tissues are placed in a growing culture containing all the necessary materials required by the tissue to develop into new plants. This method of reproduction provides a rapid means of propagating exact replicas or clones of the plant. A small tissue, the size of a mango seed, can produce hundreds to thousands of new plants, as commercially done to reproduce varieties of orchids. These greenhouse techniques of asexual reproduction have been quite successful, not only in the rapid reproduction of species, but also in developing crossbreeds and new varieties in plants, fruits, and flowers.